So what we're going to do now is talk about four of the trickiest problems out there and how that students will do them incorrectly and how to fix them to be correct, a strategy to do that. So for number one, like I said, we just came off of adding and subtracting, so like terms are in our mind. We're used to only combining x's with x's and y's with y's, which we're still kind of doing with multiplication with the exponents, but the coefficients now can be combined. So here's the mistake that happens here. People will write 3x, 5y. That's not, we can't do that because what that looks like is that looks like two terms, which we know it needs to be one final term. So something I want to point out here, since this is all multiplication and this is all one term, again, the property of multiplication that makes things able to be rearranged lets me go ahead and multiply the 3 times the 5 even though they don't have the same variable behind them. Because again, it's different than addition. Addition, we could not do that. Multiplication, we can because the order can be rearranged. So what this is going to be is we're going to go ahead and just multiply the 3 and the 15. And now, of course, the x and the y here, we're not going to combine those exponents like we've already talked about. So we would just put the xy. Okay. It's all still going to be multiplied, just instead of multiplying the 3 by the x and then multiplying it by the 5 times the y, we're just going to go ahead and multiply the 3 and the 5 and make it 15, and then multiply the 15 by the x and the y. It's still all doing the same stuff. This is just more simplified than having the 3 and the 5 separated. Okay, kind of the same thing for number 2. Because the 4 has an x behind it, the negative 9 has a y behind it. So here is a common answer. So people will say 4x squared because there's just the x squared. And then they'll put negative 9 y to the, and they'll put the y's together, y to the 4th and y to the 5th, making y to the 9th. But what the problem is with this one is now that negative becomes subtraction when it's written like that. We can't do that because then that makes this a binomial instead of a monomial. So it's the same explanation as number 1. They do not have to have the same variable behind them to multiply because multiplication can be rearranged however we want. So negative 4 times negative 9. And then since I like to keep it in alphabetical order, I'm going to put the x squared next. And then the y to the 9th was correct because you will go ahead and combine those exponents on the y, but this is how it should look. 4 times negative 9 is negative 36, then the x squared, then the y to the 9th. You are not going to have numbers in the middle of variables when we're multiplying monomials like this. Now, eventually we will get to where we multiply binomials and trinomials. That's different. But for right now, at this moment in time, you will have a coefficient and then you will have a series of variables and exponents behind it. Okay. For number 3, again, we've got different variables, but look at this one. This one has an x squared. It's just not written in alphabetical order. So what you could do is you could go ahead and flip this around, but knowing what we know now, we don't have to do that. Fractions, however, scare us more than they should, but I promise you, you guys can do fractions. So 1/3 times negative 6, multiply your coefficients, times that x, times that x squared, times that y to the 3rd, times that y. Don't forget your implied exponents of 1. If you need to use that strategy of putting those, please, please, please do so. For tricky problems like this, I would highly recommend writing out what your mental math would be. So 1/3 of negative 6 is negative 2. You can type that in your calculator if you would like. Then we've got x to the 1st times x squared, which is x to the 3rd. Then we have y to the 3rd times y to the 1st, which is y to the 4th. So for this last problem, we only have the one coefficient of 5. And then again, the order's kind of all backwards in this one, so we'll go alphabetical order. We'll go this x here, that x to the 6th there, this y, that y to the 3rd, this z to the 5th, and this is, I just wrote a 5, look at that, z to the 5th and z. Now, one thing I do want to point out, this x, y, z to the 5th, that 5 only applies to that z. It does not apply to the y or the x. I wanted to make that clear before we got started. So here 5 is going to stay 5. So we have x and x to the 6th, which is x to the 7th, y and y to the 3rd, which is y to the 4th, z to the 5th, and z makes z to the 6th power. Okay, so that's about as hard as it's going to get. If you just take it step by step, coefficients, and then like variables, putting their exponents together, you will be just fine.